Well, we've been making our customary Halloween video for 10 years now, along with other videos throughout the spooky month over the years. So with all the terrifying topics we've discussed, what's next? We've already done skeletons, werewolves, zombies, vampires, ghosts, reapers, blood, amalgamated monsters, witches, spiders, mermaids, pumpkins, and many more in some capacity.
Man, we were really scraping the barrel there with pumpkins.
And we did that one in 2015.
My favorite part is how 3 years into this Mr. Top 10 list, we were like, man, why don't it be a great idea? Vampires, no. Pumpkins.
Since you've likely read the video title already, we don't need to do the shtick. It's mummies this time. The popular kind of mummy in fiction that we'll be looking at is best defined as a corpse from ancient Egypt wrapped in bandages or a similar material who's come back to life because their rest has been disturbed by someone exploring the pyramids or ruins somewhere, and now they're awake to get some revenge or conquest. Or maybe they're friendly. Some don't even have origins like that and are just mummies or mummy-like entities who exist already doing their own thing. Most of them like to keep the wrapping on, but others wear less cliche attire. We're kinda just ranking them on how much we like them. Iconicness comes into play, but it's also us just saying, wow, this dude's cool. Their powers also might matter, but some of these mummies were definitely not meant to fight. And it wouldn't be a Halloween celebration without my co-hosts, NegetiveX.
Happy Halloween! You don't need to edit it at all, just leave it as is.
And ButIGoByGoose.
A man that goes by many names, but I go by Goose.
Now let's wrap up the top 10 mummies. Number 10, Akmodon II from Castlevania. We always like to do a Castlevania entry in our Halloween videos, and with it being the game that has a bunch of traditional spooky monsters, of course there's a mummy around. That being said, they don't tend to be that prominent. They're usually minor enemies or an easy boss. The one of note who was a boss was Akmodon II. He's generally a more straightforward victory compared to other bosses since he's slow moving, but if not properly prepared, he can catch you off guard. He was a boss in Super Castlevania 4 and Symphony of the Night, the latter of which I know him from best, so we'll look at that version. You enter his room, he comes out of his tomb, and he's like, sweet, a guy to kill. He can only walk forward and backwards and relies mostly on strength, which is actually pretty fun. If you get too close to him, he goes into wrestling mode and swings you around. His main line of distance attacks involves him using his bandages as drill whips and releases some sort of gas. Is that dust? Does he smell bad? Either way, it's a slow-moving cloud of danger that makes him hard to approach with everything going on.
Probably because mummies smell. At least Akmodon does. Take a shower, dude. Jeez. As Mr. Top 10 was saying, he's not that difficult of a boss. He's in the reverse castle, so you have to spend a lot of time actually tracking him down. And when you get there, it's not too difficult. The big thing is just avoiding those grabs.
He's pretty simple to take down if you have weapons from afar or holy water, since he's overall short range and slow, but I love the charm of all the 2D Castlevania monsters, so it doesn't take much to impress me.
Now, did I see that right? Did he die to fire? Do you just light his toilet paper on fire and he just goes?
That's just his death animation regardless. You beat him and he smolders for a bit before disintegrating, though you can light him on fire with holy water.
Oh, okay, so if you just wet his toilet paper, it disintegrates? He needs to get 2-ply.
Number 9, the mummy from Scooby-Doo. Which mummy and which Scooby series? Well, there's a lot. Before we started this list, my co-hosts were really advocating for the Scooby-Doo mummy, to which I said there's way more than the Scooby-Doo mummy. So we're going to go down the list of a few for this entry and see how they stack up against one another. And as with many Scooby-Doo monsters, they're mostly people in costumes. Oh, and I'm going to spoil all these mysteries. The original one was the mummy of Anka from Scooby-Doo Where Are You?, who is a mummy who supposedly came to life in a museum, which I liked because he was elaborate enough to be believable, but faulty enough to get caught, which you could say about most Scooby-Doo villains. He could allegedly turn people to stone, which the culprit faked by making cement models of everyone he kidnapped and himself, which is impressive since he has some quick sculpting abilities and can lift those things. I also liked that one of the clues was broken glass on the inside of the museum, implying someone broke in instead of the mummy mummy breaking out, since as a kid I was like, oh, that's a clue, I'm so smart.
That's a mummy who knew what to do with his toilet paper. Look at it.
It's nice that he did a good job with his rapping, cause he's basically the default mummy on all Scooby-Doo media.
Cause he has an immaculate rap job. You cannot beat that rapping. When you think mummy, you think Anka.
No, yeah, I mean, I'm just gonna put it out there. This guy has immense talent. He's making exact models of everyone. He really should have given up this harebrained scheme and just worked at Madame Tussauds, the wax museum. Although he'd be, revolutionizing it with his cement skill. Like, the talent that it takes to that quickly make exact replicas that everyone is being fooled by. Bravo. It's amazing that the kids were actually able to catch him.
Next that comes to mind is the mummy of King Scamsies from What's New Scooby-Doo. He had the power of hypnosis, so he had a bunch of mind-controlled humans helping him. What's cool about his mystery is the guy dressed as Scamsies was just a mind-controlled archaeologist that was forced to act as the mummy, so he was innocent. The real culprit was a prince working behind the scenes with his own hypnosis powers.
I'm just gonna put it out there. It seems like he defeated himself. Like, he could have really simplified this plot by just mind-controlling the people to make them do what he wanted, unless his end goal is just get people to dress up like mummies.
He was diverting water from some villages to drive over business to his restaurant and thought this would be a way to keep people away who would question it. He technically could have bypassed this by just hypnotizing a rich person to give him a lot of money instead.
Yeah, he could have just, walked into the lotto commission, hypnotized the guy and be like, this is a winning ticket, and then bam, he's a billionaire. He's not worried about water at that point. He's rich.
Next up, we have the ghost of Cleopatra from the movie Where's My Mummy, which tells us up front it fits the topic. She has the power to turn people to stone, again, but this power is in real time, making you wonder how quickly they can swap out the people for their rock imposters. I love the twist in the movie where the villains are the normal human grave robbers, and the people dressed as the monsters are protecting the artifacts. Velma's also the monster in the end, since she was undercover, which I don't think has ever happened before this.
She knew all the secrets. She knew how to, turn people to stone, how to move them quick. She knows how to moan correctly. That sounds a little PG-13. She knows how to groan correctly, like mummies do.
The final two mummies we'll discuss are the ones that were not people in costumes. First, there was this one that chased Scooby, Shaggy, and Scrappy in a pyramid, and when they unwrapped him, he was an invisible guy, or a spirit. I don't know, this one didn't have any personality.
So it was a ghost pretending to be a mummy? I feel like that's another waste of the ability. I mean, kudos to this ghost. He has a dream, and his dream is to be a mummy, and he went for it.
Then there was Tanis in Scooby-Doo and the Ghoul School, which was a finishing school for real monster girls. Tanis was adorable, but is this just a child who was born as a mummy, or was there a family that was mummified, since she has a father that we see in a Parents' Day scene?
And she's cute. You just want to squeeze those cheeks.
In the end, with the real mummies being pretty harmless and the fake mummies having more extraordinary powers, the best mummy in Scooby-Doo is, I don't know, maybe one of the stone-turning ones?
I think we're gonna have some strong opinions. I mean, clearly it's the ghost that's pretending to be a mummy, because it's at least a ghost. He's got invisibility powers. He's nerfing himself so we can see where he is.
I actually thought that was the worst mummy we spoke about because he's boring, but I'm glad you like him. Number 8, the mummies in Yu-Gi-Oh! It's one of my videos, so of course we have to have a Yu-Gi-Oh! Entry. Mummy cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! Made sense in the early days and fit with the theme since the plotline focused on a pharaoh and a lot of cards had that Egyptian theme to them, so all these random mummies running around were just kind of expected. The first one that comes to mind is Wandering Mummy, who was used by Yugi's grandpa in the anime. It just lets you put it in defense mode once per turn and rearrange all your set monsters so it's harder to find in battle, making it more likely to survive and do all this again the next turn. Cute card, but not much to it. Also, there's 2 mummies in the artwork, but its name specifies 1. False advertising.
Well, I mean, it does wander around. It does what it says.
The next one I think of is Poison Mummy, who's a flip monster that deals 500 points of burn damage when flipped. I've always liked this card cause burn damage felt like the coolest thing back in the day, and I want to know how this mummy got filled with poison.
I bet you that mummy definitely doesn't taste like teriyaki. That's why he's poisoned.
For context, you have 8,000 life points to start in Yu-Gi-Oh!, which would mean you would have to flip this guy 16 times alone to wipe out your opponent's life points.
Only 16 times? This seems like something I can exploit effectively. And how many can I put in my deck? 3?
Then there's Regenerating Mummy, who only regenerates if he's discarded from your hand by an opponent's effect. That's really bad regeneration generation. If he's destroyed by battle, he just dies. The last classic Yu-Gi-Oh mummy I can think of is Giant Axe Mummy.
Oh, giant axe! I thought you were saying big butt.
He can also flip himself face down and destroys monsters that attack into him if he's in defense mode and they have less attack points than his defense points. They seem to have this gimmick where the mummies liked to be flipped face down in the early days that never really got expanded upon. I also like that Giant Axe Mummy's name in Japanese is just Giant Mummy, but the English name really wanted to mention that he has an axe. Ironically, the best of the early Yu-Gi-Oh mummies might have not even been a monster card. It was a spell card, Call of the Mummy, which lets you special summon a zombie from your hand once per turn regardless of level. Also, can we count the real mummies that the crew fought in that anime Pyramid of Light movie? But once we left the early days of Yu-Gi-Oh, the Egyptian theme faded and we really didn't see mummies anymore. I guess Ghost Trick Mummy, but that's a part of an archetype of Halloween monsters, so it's not standalone. However, there is one modern mummy archetype that's only been seen in the anime, being the Dark Mummy archetype from Yu-Gi-Oh! Vrains. It was used by a doctor who had a few mummies that she used with new virus traps, also only in the anime, and their design gimmick combines mummies with medical tools, with her boss monster being Dark Mummy Surgical Forceps, to which I say, oh no, she's hot.
Dark Mummy Surgical Forceps? That's a nightmare right there. Alright, that's something you get in the Silent Hill franchise. Oh, that's real creepy.
As with most Yu-Gi-Oh cards that are only in the anime, I'm sure they'll be real one day, but for now, mummy cards are mostly in Yu-Gi-Oh's past. Number 7, the Fruity Yummy Mummy mascot. The monster cereals are a time-honored tradition of Halloween in US culture, and by tradition, I mean the General Mills cereal company releases them around Halloween every year, and everyone is like, neat. Starting in 1971, General Mills released sugary puffed cereals with marshmallows themed around classic monsters, with the Dracula one being the chocolatey Count Chocula, and the Frankenstein's monster one being the strawberry-centric Frankenberry. The early commercials usually involve them arguing about whose cereal is better, and then getting frightened by a non-scary thing. They later added Blueberry in 1973 as the blueberry-flavored cereal Ghost mascot, whose chains kind of look like nipple piercings, and thus the trio was complete. However, even though Blueberry is definitely the third of the trio, he would randomly get replaced in the ads by other fruit-themed mascots. He was still around, but the Count and Frank mostly just appeared alone or with a new mascot. First was Fruit Brute in 1974, who was a werewolf with vaguely described fruit-flavored cereal, but he was discontinued in 1982, and after a short wait, Fruity Yummy Mummy made his debut in 1987. I think he only appeared in like 2 ads before his cereal was discontinued in 1992, but still, he's considered a core part of the Monster cereal gang.
Well, I also want to take a moment to really reflect on that balanced breakfast that they have, because 80% of that breakfast is like liquids. You got milk, you got orange juice. Like, whoever eats that is gonna have to be peeing, like, it all day. I also think it's funny how, like, Frankenberry's got berry flavor, and the Fruit Brute's like, you know what? I got fruit-flavored cereal. It's like, that's what I got too, man!
His commercial lore is that he exists in ancient ruins, where the Count and Frank discover him, and he immediately offers them cereal, which is vaguely fruit-themed too. He also sings a single verse about the fruit flavor of the cereal, and immediately stops. I don't know if he was meant to be more musical, but the jingle was just kinda randomly in there. The main difference between him and the werewolf are his marshmallows were vanilla flavored, while the Brute was lime. That's it, otherwise it's the same cereal. I also like that they couldn't just call him Yummy Mummy, they had to give him the extra word in his name to let everybody know that this cereal was fruity, since Yummy Mummy doesn't tell you anything about the product. The other monsters had their flavors built into their names, like Chocula, Berry, or Fruit. Yummy is not a flavor, so his name has to be longer than everybody else's. You don't want kids thinking this is bandage flavored cereal.
Yeah, this mummy probably tastes pretty good. Which is weird because, like, you wouldn't think, tasty when you're looking at toilet paper wrapped around a dude, you know?
I think the mistake with the cereal line is, basically, they went chocolate, great. And then every other cereal they introduced was all fruit-based. Where's the cinnamon? Yummy Mummy could have easily been cinnamon. Could have been cinnamon-y Yummy Mummy. Vanilla-y Yummy Mummy. Like, it still rhymes, you just gotta add the E to it.
Also, they were kinda right about adding the extra word to his name, since you can't just Google Yummy Mummy now and find the cereal. The first results are a product and a TV show about pregnancy, so you have to specify fruity or cereal when looking up this mummy. With the monster cereals losing steam in the 90s, Yummy Mummy went away for what seemed like forever after his cancellation. The trio eventually went from being a cereal available all year round to their annual Halloween cereal that they're known as today, but only the original 3 are brought back. However, in a hype marketing stunt in 2013, every monster came back, the original trio, Fruit Brute, and Yummy Mummy. To differentiate the fruit mascots, Fruit Brute was now cherry flavored and Yummy Mummy was now orange cream. However, I think having 5 unique cereals flooded the market a bit and didn't do well with sales, because Brute and Mummy haven't been brought back in cereal form since this return, and thus, Yummy Mummy is only kept alive by the monster cereals being pop culture icons. The closest we got was on the 50th anniversary of the cereals. They released a combined cereal with all 4 major flavors, with Mummy having to share his vague fruit flavoring with the Brute again. He didn't really have his own cereal identity here, but at least they let him play the tambourine in their band. It is weird looking at the Mummy's role in their history, since he was created in the late 80s, while the other 4 were created in the first half of the 70s, so it may be hard to attract the same nostalgic crowd for him. In 2023, the first new monster cereal was introduced since the Mummy, being the zombie Carmella Creeper with a caramel apple cereal. Once again, only the original trio was brought back with her, but the werewolf and Mummy were still around on group advertising.
Okay, so they're adding to the pantheon. I'm just gonna say, where's the Creature of the Black Lagoon cereal? What rhymes with lagoon that's a food? Lagoon.
So in the end, the Mummy may not be as iconic as his cohorts and not get his own cereal anymore, but it's good to see they're all still hanging out. Number 6, Anacaris from Darkstalkers. With Darkstalkers, aka the Vampire series being the quintessential fighting game series for classic movie monsters, of course they would have a fighting mummy, and it's a big one. Anacaris is the mummy of the roster, and like everyone in this game, he's got a weird way of fighting. Part of his fighting style is what you would expect, with bandage manipulation and sarcophagus throwing. He can dump his tomb right on your head or wrap his bandages around you and slam you. But then you notice he can rip through the fabric of space and time to do this. Phasing through things is part of his mantra. He just makes his limbs pop out from underground to make his big body even more unavoidable. And he has a snake in his arms. He can also spit out some sort of curse that turns you into a tiny thing related to whatever you are, making you unable to attack with much slower movement for however long it lasts. His cursing powers know no limits, cause he has attacks where the curse goes crazy with a bombardment of elements of nature, along with a much larger gif of the sarcophagus dropping. I also have no idea how tall he is, cause he can split his body in half for attacks, even being able to send his legs moving while he floats around to attack faster. He leaves his legs in charge of his servant/assistant/inner self, Kabit. He rides them like a mech suit.
This isn't a mummy. This is 2 people in a trench coat dressed up as a mummy.
Man, that mummy has long legs. Damn, he is. He does not skip leg day.
So, for most mummies, I think the bandages are just there for aesthetic purposes, but I think for this guy, it's very clear the bandages are actually holding him together, because he keeps getting split apart like nobody's business.
The main thing I don't like about Anacaris is his movement. They made him super slow and floaty to make up for his big body, so I rarely ever played him. To learn his backstory, you sort of have to dig, since it's Darkstalkers where the biographies aren't as apparent, but we learn he was a pharaoh back in ancient Egypt. He prepared for a return to life thousands of years in the future when he foresaw an alien invasion. Then that alien invasion happened about 5,000 years later, and he defeated it, maybe. So he time traveled back 5,000 years in the past to defeat that same evil, I think. I can never tell what time period he's in with these arcade endings. Regardless of if any of that's canon, in Darkstalkers 3, when the villain Jeddah was threatening the world as we knew it, he went back to present day and attempted to fight the evil. He eventually realized the best way to keep his kingdom safe was just to transport it to another realm and let everyone be happy there. And he's willing to take in new recruits at any time. He seems fine if you just want to chill in wherever he is. He's hard to read, where I can't tell if he wants to crush you or if he's just doing one of his monologues as a leader and doesn't really care about anything else. Either way, Anacharis is an interesting dude to watch in action, just don't try to analyze him too closely. Number 5, Cofagrigus from Pokemon. Technically, it's just a living sarcophagus, so does it count as a mummy? Well, there's enough mummy-related stuff with its character, and it's my list, so I say it's fine to count him. Plus, I always like to do a Pokemon entry on these variety lists. Legally speaking, it's just made of organic material that so happens to look like a sarcophagus, but with it being a ghost-type Pokemon whose English name is a combination of coffin and sarcophagus, you can basically consider it a sarcophagus with a face. What has always made Cofagrigus such a memorable Pokemon to me is its lore. Regardless of how good it is in the metagame, or whatever it did in the anime, the entries in the Pokedex about it have some of the most morbid or terrifying information, or just mildly unsettling, and it makes me interested to look into this potentially sinister Pokemon. Let's start with its pre-evolution Yamask, who has one of the most tragic backstories in Pokemon. Its various Pokedex entries state, they arose from the spirits of people interred in graves in past ages. Each retains memories of its former life. Each of them carries a mask that used to be its face when it was human. Sometimes they look at it and cry. It rambles through ruins, searching for someone who knows its face. I'm not sure about you, but this makes me feel awkward about using this Pokemon. I'm just sending a ghost of a human out there who knows it was human to fight animals. I feel like they really don't want to fight if they're bogged down by their human memories, or maybe they fight to forget.
I feel like I would cry too if I was holding on to my own face. But how would I cry if my face was in my hands?
So you're telling me is one should never read the Pokedex entries because they're always super sad. It's like, oh, look at this cute little Pokemon. It thinks about death every day. It's like, oh, I'm sorry, little man. It's just a guy. It's Tim from IT before he died.
I understand their tragedy of being forced to carry a symbol of their face forever, but it kind of loses meaning when they all have that same generic face carving. Are we just supposed to imagine that they all look different, or were all the Yamask just siblings in a past life? Anyway, all that tragedy goes away when they evolve into Cofagrigus, and now they have a different purpose in life according to the Pokedex. Their entries state, they pretend to be elaborate coffins to teach lessons to grave robbers. It has been said that they swallow those who get too close and turn them into mummies. So there's the mummy involved with them. I don't know if this means that they specifically look to punish grave robbers due to their immoral intentions, or if it would do this to any old person because it's a force of chaos and grave robbers just so happen to be the easiest people to fool. But either way, it's going to find its mummy one way or another. And what's its method of turning people into mummies? Does it just wrap them up and leave them there for eternity, causing them to die from being buried alive? I feel like Game Freak kind of just swept it under the rug how dark this is. To represent this in its fighting style, its ability is Mummy, which makes any Pokemon that hits it with a physical move have their ability turn into Mummy 2 and locks away their old ability. So they might not get bandaged up physically, but their ability gets mummified. And for those who wonder about its past life from when it was a Yamask, another entry says, people say it no longer remembers that it was once human. So maybe the evolution drives it mad where it now aimlessly attacks people since it no longer has its humanity. I also like that the entry starts with people say to give it some plausible deniability that, it could remember, it could not, I don't know.
I'm just imagining the meeting where they're having this backstory and they're like, but man, does he remember? The debate they were having, they're like, he has to remember or else it's not sad enough, but it's sadder if he forgets and just becomes a monster. Maybe that's why he keeps going after grave robbers, because he knows he used to be human and he can't stand that humans exist. He must forget, so he attacks.
If you want a less tragic Cofagrigus, in Generation 8, there is a specific variant of Yamask that evolved into its alternate form, Runerigus, which is its evolutionary line infused with a curse from an ancient painting. However, it loses many of its mummy aspects, so it's just a footnote in this entry. Number 4, the 1932 Mummy movie. It feels weird to put the mummy that pretty much set the default look for all mummies in fiction for like the next century in this spot rather than number 1, but I like to think of him as the groundwork that other mummies improved upon over time. Plus, this is still a high entry. One of the most disappointing things about this movie to me when I was younger was the iconic imagery of the mummy all decrepit in his wraps is barely a part of the movie. They have it on all the posters and all the promos. Anytime there's a history of Universal Movie Monsters collectible with him, it's always the old mummy. However, he just appears in the opening of the movie when he's accidentally released and an archaeologist goes mad. Then it cuts 10 years into the future when the mummy, named Imhotep, is now in his normal human form with a bit of wrinkles from age, but otherwise, you may have not even recognized that this was the same character as advertised. That being said, the movie is still good. They just knew human who looks kinda tired doesn't sell as much as mummy in bandages.
We remember him for that one costume he wore the one time and not what he looked like 90% of the time. Honestly, you're making a strong argument, Mr. Top 10 List. Honestly, I'm surprised we put him at 4. I will say, though, I do feel a little bad for this guy. Like, in classic horror movie monsters, he was number 5. And now, when it comes down to mummy specific, he's moved up one space. You think he'd be a lock. He's sitting there in the locker room right now like, what am I doing wrong?
With it being 1932, the movie relies a lot on unseen visuals and practical effects to show Imhotep's powers. He can hypnotize people into being his servants and kill people from a distance who try to get in the way of his plan. It's just magical death power that leaves it up to your imagination on what it can do.
I say for magical death power, it's kind of slow. Like, he's giving him a lot of time to get help.
To be fair, he had a magical camera that spied on the guy and waited until no one was around but him.
I guess that's true. There's nothing anyone can do. It just feels kind of weird when you got a power that is like 1,000 times less effective than just like a gun. Like, he could have taken him down in half the time.
He disguises himself as an Egyptian historian who wants to revive the woman he loved by capturing her descendant, mummifying her, and resurrecting her as she was to get her memories back, so add that to his powers list. We see he was mummified alive as punishment for being in love with a princess when he was merely a high priest, so there's some tragedy to this story on his side. Interestingly, this was a standalone Universal monster movie. The rest of the Universal monsters like Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, and the Wolfman got a bunch of sequels, but for the Mummy, they made an entirely different movie franchise when they wanted to do more with him. They did this with the other monster franchises too, but there was no attempt at connecting the 1940s Mummy movies with the one from 1932. First, we got the Mummy's Hand in 1940, which gives us the mummy action that I was expecting before. This mummy is just a minion in the movie named Karis, who works for a priest who protects the tomb of an ancient Egyptian princess, going around doing fetch tasks and killing anyone who gets in the way, just as a limping silent mummy with extraordinary strength. Then we got sequels, The Mummy's Tomb, Eyes, and Curse, which had diminishing returns when it came to plot, but they consistently had the mummy killing people more. It kind of shows that the more the mummy kills, the less plot there is. So if you like action, this is for you. And by action, I mean the mummy slowly dragging his feet against people who have no idea where to run from him. Also, if you want to count it, the movie series sort of ends with Abbott and Costello Meet the Mummy, which was the last Universal movie to reference this mummy. I don't know if that's the actual canon, but it's funny to imagine this horror franchise ending on a screwball comedy. Number 3, Mummymon from Digimon. Technically, I don't know if he's actually a mummy or just has a mummy motif, since we don't learn his history before we meet him. I don't think it's a Kafagrigus scenario where he's a human before he's a Digimon, so I say just let him be a mummy man who's also a necromancer. He was in the Digimon Adventure portion of the franchise, and he just likes to do evil things with cool powers.
He's not just gonna hang out with the traditional ancient Egyptian stuff. Bats, apparently, as the serial provides. Scarab beetles. No, he's up with the modern times. Machine guns.
Yeah, the laser machine gun blows his other powers out of the water for us. He's got some soul abilities and the classic bandage wrap attacks, but the gun is what gets him to this spot.
Digimon Digital monsters, Digimon are the champions.
Well, not the champion, it's only number 3.
I'm sorry, Mr. Top 10 List. Perhaps you didn't hear me. Digimon, digital monsters, Digimon are the champions. He's the champion.
And the champion is at number 1. This is number 3.
Well, he may not be number 1 to you, but he's number 1 to the rest of us.
Just talk about what he does in the show.
I mean, I think the best part about him is just how relatable he is. There's this whole scene where him and his friend are going around and they find a vat of soup in the ground, like a giant hole in the ground. And what does this guy do? He goes to eat the soup. Because obviously, what are you gonna do when you find a soup in the ground? You're gonna eat it. I mean, it's really a shame he gets jumped when he tries to get the soup and repeatedly jumped over it, but you know, it was pretty cool. No, so apparently it's sacred soup, and so he's actually not allowed to eat it, so they just put soup in the ground with no sign saying, hey, don't eat the soup, hiding in the bushes, waiting for poor, relatable people like Mummymon to try to quench their hunger, to try to just eat a little healthy food. This man was having a bad day. Car's having troubles. He's tired. He's sweaty. These arrogant little punks leave soup in the middle of the ground, expecting people not to eat it? I believe that's entrapment.
You know, eating this soup reveals a stone that could affect the fabric of the world itself. Mummymon had a chance to do something real funny if he knew what was going on.
Yeah, if that's what happens to me after eating soup, you can bet your sweet Bippy I'm gonna eat soup every day. Now, where's that floor soup? I'm coming.
Number 2, King Ramses from Courage the Cowardly Dog. Anyone who grew up with Courage has the image of this mummy etched in their head for eternity. There were technically 2 mummies in Courage though, but most people just bring up King Ramses. The more traditional looking mummy was in the properly titled Courage Meets the Mummy. This tells the story of a Mayan baker from ancient times who was accused of stealing cookies from the princess when it was really her advisor. So the princess sentences the baker to death by mummification, and now a curse has brought him back for revenge. The princess and the advisor were ancestors of Eustace and Muriel, so he specifically is coming for them. While the cookie thief sounds like something toned down for kids, they literally describe his punishment as his mouth sewn shut, his eyebrows plucked, and the rest of his body mummified. So the joke is more that it's an extreme measure for such a minor crime that he didn't even commit. And the episode has that classic Courage comedy, where the mummy uses conventional means to get to Kansas while getting annoyed by people on the way there. Eustace and Muriel reenact the damning incident through hypnosis when the mummy arrives, where Eustace's ancestor now gets rightfully blamed and the mummy could rest in peace. I enjoyed this episode. I'm always a fan of supernatural creature does mundane things for a joke, and I like how this guy was pretty chill once the conflict is resolved. He's not a bad guy, he just wanted justice. But the more iconic mummy from Courage was King Ramsay from the episode King Ramsay's Curse, because he was so damn creepy. He may not be wrapped up in bandages, but his ghost haunting from a distance was potentially nightmare-inducing.
Yeah, speaking of things that scared you as a child, this episode made me stop watching Courage for at least 2 years. I watched everything else up until this episode. The day this episode aired, I could no longer handle it. I didn't understand what was happening. I think it was like, why is this so scary?
Honestly, I feel like when I run into Courage the Cowardly Dog clips, it's always Ramses in the wind. That scene right there.
His ancient slab was taken from his resting place by thieves and ends up at Courage's home. When Eustace hears it's worth a fortune, he refuses to give it up to an archaeologist trying to get it back to its proper place, so the ghost of King Ramses visits and tells Eustace in his eerie, echoey voice, "Return the slab, or suffer my curse," which there are 3 of. I like how the middle one is the funny curse to give us a break between the 2 serious curses. The first one is flooding, the second is bad music, and the final is locusts. The bad music plays a song that just keeps repeating, "The man in gauze, the man in gauze," which I like since I can use it to justify that he's still a mummy despite his lack of rapping. The gauze is just referenced somewhere else with him. Expectedly, Courage is going to force Eustace to give up the slab by the end, and we get a nice close-up shot of him. What made Ramsay so creepy to so many people was the voice and art style combination. Courage is no stranger to mixed media, but the use of late 90s CG made him so uncanny to look at, and the fact that he was almost always in the distance gave him that mystery factor. We couldn't quite make out his details, but we were too afraid to get close. And that voice was one of a kind. It's a unique style of eerie, and it was just the show's creator doing his version of a scary voice. But as with this show normally, they still do a good job job of mixing in the comedy, like Ramses saying, "Aw, come on," in his scary voice when a plague is foiled, and Eustace steals the show by just saying, "What's your offer?" to Ramses' face, completely unfazed by this horrifying man. He just said he would lay a curse on you, and you're like, yeah, but is there money involved? King Ramses may have only existed for 10 minutes, but once you meet him, he leaves an impact for a lifetime. We got some honorable mentions here. Mumm-Ra from Thundercats. My favorite power from him, and probably his most commonly used power in the original cartoon, is he can transform his appearance into any creature, whether they're a giant monster or a friendly looking dude. Basically, I enjoy when he looks less like a mummy and more like a not mummy. Con-Ra from Killer Instinct. He's another character who looks like a mummy but may not be classified as one. In fact, they call him a sorcerer, but come on, he's clearly the mummy of the roster. He does the bandage wrap throws. This is mummy stuff. I also like how happy he looks when he takes your soul if he wins. The Ben 10 Mummy. I actually never really watched Ben 10, but this is still a cool design. I dig it. All the mummies from Mummies Alive. I remember nothing about this cartoon outside the premise, but it fit the Ninja Turtle-inspired shows of the 90s where you make a superhero team out of something cool. It lasted over 50 episodes, so they were really pushing for it. And the mummy that Fry ate in Futurama. It's just a funny joke. I like it. I was gonna eat that mummy. Sometimes for the top spot, you just have to go with the expected. And to most people in my generation, when you say we're looking for the mummy to put at the end of our list, the first thing that may come to mind is number 1, Imhotep from The Mummy, 1999. Based on the 1932 movie, the 1999 Mummy movie built on the premise of the original, but made it much more grand and adventurous. While the original was mostly horror, this one was definitely more of your Indiana Jones action-adventure style movie with horror elements. This version of Imhotep was less verbose than the original, but makes up for it with many wacky powers.
I don't know what you guys are talking about. When I watched that movie as a kid, he was terrifying. I thought it was a horror for sure.
When he's first revived, he's in his decaying corpse form, but we see he can get a workable body back by using other people's bodies. It's kind of an off-screen thing, but we still see the shadow of him absorbing another adventurer or the aftermath of him taking someone else's eyes. They show enough to make you fear him even in his weaker form. It was actually pretty cool when he was walking around as a corpse, since he still managed to have that aura of danger to him. Besides being unsettling, he felt unkillable. Brendan Fraser's character straight up yells back at his face and shoots him after Imhotep does his scary mummy bit, but he immediately reforms, giving the main characters a reason to run. Like Fraser shoots him multiple times in a different scene. This guy has a lot more strength than you would expect from a rotting corpse. There's no stupidity from those killed by him, usually. They have weapons that should decimate a man who's been dead for centuries, but he's full of surprises. He backs up his bark with his bite, and that bite comes in the form of scarabs that can turn a person into a skeleton in a matter of seconds. And after he's human again, the basis of his powers is sand, sand, and more sand.
He's able to make a giant sandstorm with his face on it and chase down a plane and swallow it.
Well, you see how big his mouth is, right? I mean, he's gotta be hungry.
My favorite part is when the plane is like shooting back at him with a machine gun and he just kind of sits there and laughs like, huh, you think that's gonna do anything to me? I'm a giant mound of sand. Honestly, I'm gonna assume that the CGI holds up really well. Back when we were kids, that was like peak CGI right there.
You know, fun fact, the reason it all aged so well is because none of it is CG. All the actors just do that. Little known fact about Brendan Fraser's The Mummy. It's a documentary.
And I know we discussed it in our sand manipulation video, but I also like that he can just turn into a pile of sand so he can fit through a keyhole to get through a locked door, along with some other body morphing sand powers.
He's got the ability to stretch his face out. He can take control of giant walls of water. I mean, he's great. He's afraid of cats. That's a power.
Then, of course, there was a sequel, The Mummy Returns, but instead of looking at the movie, let's look at the video game tie-in for the PlayStation 2 from 2001 to see how his powers evolved. Also because we tracked down a copy of it and decided to play it since it sounded like a good idea.
So basically, the plot of the game follows the plot of the Mummy Returns movie very loosely. Like, it doesn't even follow at all. Like, let's answer this question. Is this a good game? You might think to yourself that this was just a cash grab, trying to cash in on a movie that came out to try to make a little extra extra money on the side. And you would be absolutely right, because this game is so awful, I swear to God. It was terrible. So basically, you give your choice. You can play as either Brendan Fraser's character, or you can play as Imhotep himself. Obviously, I played as Imhotep, and they actually bring in quite a few of his powers into the game itself. So for example, you know, in the first movie where he's tracking down those guys, taking their body parts to become more human. That basically happens here. When you injure somebody, you can suck all their powers and become less mummy-like and regain your health. So that's pretty cool. But basically, you spend most of the game running around, finding collectibles, and bringing them back to a specific place. Like, none of his other powers, like all the big scenes in the Mummy Returns movie, are just kind of skipped. The scene where they're chasing the hot air balloon and you're like a giant face of water, that's not included in any way, shape, or form. It's super depressing. But in the end, if you ever wanted to see what would happen if Imhotep actually managed to kill Brendan Fraser, you get to see it, because he's the second to last boss fight, and you just get to knock him off a cliff, and he actually dies, which was unexpected. You think Rick, the main protagonist of the series, would pop up more than once, but in the game, when you're playing as Imhotep, he literally pops up just for his boss fight, and it's like a 2-minute boss fight. And then you actually get to fight the Scorpion King. I want to tell you, the Scorpion King was the worst boss fight I've ever had in my life. The nice thing is, though, at least they kept the level of CGI consistent between the movie and the game. It took me like an hour to beat this boss, just because the timing is so specific. You have to like bait out a specific move, but if you move too quickly, he won't do it. So you're just sitting there trying to wait. It's terrible. But just so everyone knows, I did beat it for this channel, just so we have 30 seconds worth of footage. The game at least gave us a lot of justification for why Imhotep is number one. Because in the final, you know, when you beat the game and you get the final screen of text, it literally says that he is the most powerful mummy. So clearly, he has to be number one.
So for showing us the dangers of mummies and sand firsthand, Imhotep from 1999 takes the spot as the top mummy. Now, what did you think? Were all these mummies cool, frightening, funny, or a combination of the three? Or should some of them have stayed under wraps forever? Who are some of your favorite mummies in fiction, whether we discussed them or not? Let us know in the comments. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and we will see you in the next video.